Vital to North America, let's trace the long history of the Panama Canal with Professor Julie Green.
The idea of building a canal goes back centuries because until we had that, ships had to go all the way down through the Cape Horn or the Drake Passage at the tip of South America. The Isthmus of Panama is such a fascinating spot where the North and South America meet, has made it a geopolitical issue for centuries and remains so today. From the 16th century onwards, people realized that if they could build a canal, they'd be able to cut the distance by roughly 8,000 miles and save weeks and weeks of travel. So the economic, the geopolitical consequences of that were huge. Even before people began thinking about the canal, it was the site for a railroad. In the mid-19th century, literally the first transcontinental railroad built in the Americas was built across Panama. The gold rush in California generated interest in finding a way to speed up the traffic. So ships would come to the eastern side of Panama, unload their goods, travel by train across the isthmus to the Pacific Ocean, and then up to California. So that traffic really intensified the thinking that even better than a railroad would be a water canal for moving goods, for moving personnel, and for trade. The dream of a canal on the Isthmus of Panama was a global dream. The Emperor of Spain was talking about it in the 16th century. The French made the first attempt, 1881 to 1889. That effort failed very dramatically. So there's been global interest in this. And of course, all of that global interest and the failure of the French only intensified the American interest in building the canal, because it gave the U.S. under Theodore Roosevelt the opportunity to kind of use this as a way to prove that the United States was a remarkable global power, that it could do what Europe could not. The U.S. Canal Project, it was an engineering marvel, to be sure. Locks at both ends of the canal, raise the ships up, have them move through Gatun Lake, which is a human-made lake. At the time, it was the largest human-made lake in the world, and then lower again down. The official date of completion of the U.S. Canal Project is 1914. In fact, just as World War I is breaking out in Europe, in America, there are many comparisons made to the difference between these two events. There's a quote, I'm paraphrasing, somebody says, "The lights are going out in Europe just as the United States opens this spectacular scientific achievement." What impact did it have? It certainly revolutionized global trade. The United States benefited from it geopolitically. It absolutely did ensure that the United States would be seen as an important global power. Over the decades, by the second half of the 20th century, however, the United States was actually not paying a lot of attention to the canal. It didn't make the United States a lot of money. There continued to be safety issues with it. And so overall, it remained, of course, important for global trade. Anything that eliminates 8,000 miles of travel is going to be important. But in some ways, it didn't live up to the expectations the U.S. had had for it. I think that it was very important. The railroad travels from the Midwest to California wouldn't be profoundly shaped, but we can see when we look at the conversations happening in the U.S. at the time that there was a very important, albeit subtle, rethinking of the entire geography of the United States because of the ways that the canal connected the U.S. to Asia and made trade with Asia and between Europe and Asia much easier. It made the western ports of the United States much more important. There was more than a negligible effect, to be sure. The United States signs a new treaty finally in 1977, the Carter-Torrijos treaties, that sets up to give Panama complete control over the canal as of December 31st, 1999. And how this comes about is also interesting. For the course of the decades that the United States controls the canal, there have been tensions with Panama over it, tensions which gradually grow more fierce. The Panama bridles increasingly at feeling like it's a subordinate player, almost a colony of the United States. And so the U.S. makes a series of concessions to Panama. But in the 1960s, riots break out in January 1964 over the role of the United States in its domination of Panama. By now, also, if we just think globally, decolonization is happening around the world. The Suez Canal has been transferred to Egypt. There's a feeling that domination, like the United States had over Panama for all of these years, has to change. And so all of these things come together, the tensions, the riots, the global wave of decolonization, to make it quite clear to American elites by the mid-1960s that the canal has to be transferred to Panama. LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, begins negotiations. These are continued by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, and finally then completed by Jimmy Carter in 1977. At the elite level, there was bipartisan consensus that this needed to happen, but politically was very different. Ronald Reagan began campaigning, and he raised the issue that we were about to lose the canal if steps weren't taken to halt negotiations. And he found, to his surprise, this massive public response to what he was saying. And so he made it into a huge part of his campaign. I think what was happening was that Theodore Roosevelt's boosterism back in the early 20th century had really helped to make the Panama Canal into this everlasting symbol of American greatness. America was magnanimous power that used its scientific and engineering might to give gifts to the world. That mythology was so powerful that Reagan was able to tap into it. So at a political level, it was controversial and has remained so. I think that the issue helps Reagan defeat Carter for re-election, helps Reagan win the presidency. But of course, by the time he becomes president, the Carter-Torrijos treaties have been signed. And so the issue then kind of falls away. The process of transfer begins immediately. The United States begin training Panamanians to manage the canal. The canal zone slowly starts to be dismantled, and preparations are made so that in 1999, Panama will be ready to take control of the canal. And of course, as you can imagine, that moment, December 31st, 1999, is a huge moment in Panama's history, a huge celebration. The canal itself began to be made obsolete as ships grew larger. And so in the 21st century, Panama, with overwhelming support from its population, created a special tax to build an expansion of the canal, an expansion that was carefully designed to be more environmentally useful. The expanded canal works by literally recycling water. So overall, the Panama Canal has become a very important symbol of national pride in Panama and a big part of its economic success. Ever since the canal was transferred to Panama, there have been anxieties in the United States about other global powers having influence there, particularly China. The fact is that Chinese do play a role in supporting the canal. There are some Hong Kong subsidiaries that are managing some of the ports, and China is funding the building of a new bridge. People's anxieties. I think some of it goes back to this boosterism around the canal and its symbol as a tremendous gift of the United States to world civilization. It allows politicians to tap into people's anxieties about what it meant that we lost the canal and what it could mean if another power had control there as well.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.